Gokie kaga desu ka? Watanabe dan desu. On today's episode of Backward Engineering Your Project, we're going to talk about what is perhaps the most important part of your project. Yes, even more important than your content, even more important than who you think is your highest and best platform on which to distribute it. The most important part of pitching your project is you. And why am I saying that? Because the likelihood that you're going to go into a company with your project and have it be absolutely everything they could possibly want from top to bottom in terms of how it appeals to whatever their company's general type of message is, how it fits in with their budget, how it fits in with people that they have affiliated with them and all of that, not likely. So what you have to look at every single pitch meeting that you have is as an audition. And what's the audition? The audition is whether or not they want to work with you in the future. So a big part of it is to show not only how flexible you are, but also how you understand what they need. But even more important than all of that is to get them to know who you are. Now, you don't necessarily do that by going all the way back to your childhood and doing a recitation from them. No, what you do is you figure out where your talent in particular fits in with whatever the needs of the company are. So let's go over some of the things that you should be aware of when you're preparing a pitch. And yes, I am going to say that the more pitching you do, the less rehearsed they should be. You go into a pitch and you're completely packaged. There's a certain slickness to it, but there's also a certain coldness that doesn't really get into who you are. Obviously, the first few times you do it, you're a bundle of nerves. So it's better to have at least something of a script in your head. And because you're trying to capitalize on what it is you are as a creator, you're going to want to make sure that you begin with that. So, as you know that I always talk about, there's three different types of creators. There's those who are very focused on story. There are those who are very focused on character. And there are those who are very focused on scene. That is what you must always lead with. So when you're going in there and you're talking the kind of open, casual, chatty part before you get into the meat and potatoes of what you're talking about, you kind of look at what the other person is doing and saying and what kind of hints they're giving you. You look over what's in their office. If you're in an office, if you're on a Zoom call, hopefully they don't have a fake back. By the way, this is not a fake back. This is actually a screen that my mom painted in the 50s, but that's another story. But you kind of see who they are and where you might have some compatibility. Once they tell you that they're ready to move forward with the pitch, remember which of those three areas that you are strong with. So, for example, let's say that you're strong with character. Then start with your story overall. Kind of set up what the context is, kind of set up what the character is going through, what their want and need is in relationship to what the mission they're on is. This is the kind of time when knowing the Joseph Campbell stuff comes in handy, because that's become kind of Hollywood nomenclature since the George Lucas era. Maybe not quite as much today, but it's certainly still very much in play. And the language of it is still used with people talking about the character arc, where people are talking about the journey, where people are talking about the mission or the mentor. Focus on those aspects of your story. Now, let's say that you're good with character. Then I would strongly suggest that the way you begin is you talk exclusively about the character and not their mission. Describe who they are. Describe what their benefits are. Describe the reasons why we should love them. And please don't make it something like they pet puppies on their way to work. That's nice. And that's a good feature that you can have perhaps come in later or as a recurring joke that helps solidify that person's characteristics. But no, you want to kind of position them into why we should like them. And a lot of times it's because you're going to position someone in a situation where they might be somehow challenged and they rise to it. It can be a small thing. It can be a fight over a park, something like that, where we're introduced to them. We get to see how they react to the world around them. And then from there, you build in why the situation they're going to be faced with is more likely than not this character's biggest nightmare in life. That this is not something they anticipated, this is not something they wanted, but watch how they react to it. Now, you might say, but what does that mean if it's like a romantic comedy and you've got a young couple who are moving into an apartment? Well, yeah, can you imagine anything that isn't a better source of talking about all the nightmares you could potentially have? Elevator problems. You don't like the color of the wall. You've already spilled something on the white carpet. You show the character in the challenges that they're faced, whether they're large or small, and that reaction can be funny. This is why sitcoms are funny, because you notice that you're always focused on everybody in a constant state of irritation, not only at the people around them, but at the world around them. And yeah, the plot of the sitcom is to get them out of it. But again, that's something where you're focused on character. Now, let's say that you're scene focused. This is perhaps the most tricky because you're got to approach your project in terms of isolated parts as opposed to the story as a whole or the character as a whole. Now, I'm someone who actually comes more from the scene-oriented realm. So the way I would always start my pitches once we got into the actual nitty-gritty is I would start by setting the scene. I would start by talking about the location. And from that location, I would build in who the character is and how they're intersecting with that location. Why? Because location can determine the quality of the scene. It gives everyone else not only a story element to fight against, but also how their character is challenged. Think of the beginning of Dracula. Whether it's the book or the 31 movie or any of the follow-ups to it, you have a character who is a traveler, who's a real estate agent, who's going in to this very, very mystical land that he knows nothing about. And he's going to be meeting with this impressive count who's got the nobility behind him and clearly is going to be dangerous. But setting up Transylvania is vitally important because because that sets the context for the great scenes that will follow, and thereby when you're pitching you can kind of daisy chain your great scenes as combinations of location, how my characters are interacting with it, and how it's moving the story apart. But you always lead with your strength. In the past, another trick that you would say when you're talking about your project is you would say it's A meets B. It's Terms of Endearment meets Terminator. You know, you would come up with different ways of trying to frame what your project is in terms of what the company might be looking for, or in terms of what's been successful or has been meaningful at some point in the past. This is perhaps, again, not as common as it used to be, but it's still very much there. And one of the dangers to avoid is to not reference movies that everyone else will reference. Or, and this is a trick, and you got to kind of present yourself as nutty in order to make this happen, or you misappropriate the example you're using and you try to approach it from a different angle. So let's say, for example, that you're wanting to talk about something that's a Marvel Universe type thing, and you're wanting to approach it as a big spectacle that you want to move forward with. Well, let's say that you decide to talk about Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Iron Man, the Stark, and you're trying to explain him. Well, everyone knows the way he's been positioned. So what you would probably do is you would frame him differently within that. Say, well, yeah, it is actually a combination of Avengers Endgame and Joker. And what I want to do is in mind, I'm showing how Iron Man and Joker are actually the same person. And with that, I think I can bring an audience in that maybe we weren't used to seeing. We're going to kind of repurpose that insane energy that someone who's wildly successful as an entrepreneur has with someone who's wildly psycho. Now, again, that's not necessarily out of the realm of what people might pitch, but it's not the way they would usually directly pitch it, because they would mostly pitch it on the fantasy element of who this person is, not on their dark side, not on their, in the case of the Joker, not on their positive side. You know, you're wanting to get the other person's attention. The other thing is when you talk about why you picked their particular company, try to come up with some fact about their company that not everyone is going to say. You go into Netflix and you talk to them about deep dive research, you talk to them about the big spectacles that they're doing, you talk to them about their ability to be the new Miramax in terms of curating some really interesting social material. No. What I would do is, if I was going into Netflix, now remember, I'm coming at this from a little bit of a perverse personality who was a former executive, is I would go in there and I would talk about something that they're doing that isn't necessarily big on the radar. In fact, what I might do, it's kind of on the radar, but I would really highlight it. I would highlight the relaunching of Unsolved Mysteries, because that's not what the average person who's going to go into Netflix will talk about. Or I'll talk about how important their strategy was in understanding how to fill in the gap that Blockbuster didn't do, and how, and I would actually turn it into a question for them that they might not have been asked, at least by the majority of people. I would say something to the effect, well, in the same way you saw the gaps that Blockbuster was ignoring, what are some of the gaps that you feel you as an executive would like to address in the company, just to make sure you have career longevity? Now this means you've got to be really, really secure of yourself. But you ask the person, well, what is it that you want to do? What is it that's your dream project that may be something Netflix doesn't have on its radar yet, or doesn't look like a type that they're looking for? Because sometimes in their revealing of what their position within the company is, you can find a way to take whatever your story is subtly. You don't do it directly, please, and you somehow kind of fit it around what they're saying. Like if someone says something crazy to the effect of, well, you know, one of the things that I've always appreciated, one of the things that really got me interested in, let's say, the suspense and horror genre, was the works of Sheridan Le Fanu, who I think is one of the great ghost story and horror story writers, well, working contemporaneously with Edgar Allan Poe, only across the pond. And I know that no one would ever do that. And meanwhile, I, as the person who's pitching, would be thinking about, do I even know who this person is? And if I do, oh, this is the guy who wrote Carmilla. This is the guy who came up with a lot of this, with a lot of these models for psychological terror. In the middle of doing it, I would drop a reference to a Sheridan Le Fanu story while I'm discussing one of my characters, or something like that. You kind of place yourself into showing that you and the person you're talking to have an insight, and plus your own list of things that you find great can be helpful too. And this is why when I'm dealing with my students, one of the most evil questions I would usually ask a class the first day is I'd say, what movie or TV show or YouTube channel do you love that you're embarrassed to tell other people that you love as much as you do? I don't want to know your top 10 favorite movies because I know you're going to go into a panic and try to come up with things that you find would be appealing to someone like me who's a pointy-headed intellectual. No, I do not want to hear that you love Last Year at Marienbad and La Ventura and Rocco and His Brothers. I want to hear of the trashy movie that inspired you. Oh, you love The Other Side of Midnight. Got it. Okay, well, first of all, we all know that that was the start of Susan Sarandon's career. She will never mention it or answer a question about it. We also know that it was a major Sidney Sheldon book. It was reverse noir. It has all sorts of really interesting things about it, but no one knows it. And it's kind of a crappy movie. But liking that means that you have very populist taste. And not only do you have populist taste, but you also have tastes that show that you can take a big theme and add a trashy element that would be very audience appealing. Because a lot of times, a lot of the companies you're going to are determined to be considered really artistic. But we all know in our deepest heart of hearts that the public likes a little bit of a wallow. When people were watching House of Cards, they weren't loving it because it was ingenious screenwriting. Well, it was in a way, but we were also loving it because it reaffirmed that kind of nasty, graspy quality in Kevin Spacey that we would have seen in old episodes of Dynasty. It was tugging on those same heartstrings. It wasn't because it was dealing with politics and international corruption. No, it's because we kept waiting for that moment when Alexis and Crystal would get into a fight just to destroy a Nolan Miller gown. So to understand where your inspirations are and how they can help humanize your project is very important too. Also, in the course of talking about your project, and this is perhaps the single most important piece, you must say why this story has relevance to you. Because in a country of 330 plus million people that are your potential audience, in a world of 7 billion people, there's going to be people who are coming at it the same way you are. So what makes you the exclusive person who can tell this story? Now, let's say, for example, I'm going to do a story about the like the memoirs of a geisha era. Well, the fact that I spent time in Japan growing up and the fact that I'm natively Japanese means that I'm going to understand a lot of that culture on the minute level. No, I'm not literate as far as Japan Nalia is concerned, but I'm certainly more literate than someone who probably has done research on Google about Japan. So I would frame everything from that perspective. Now, let's say I'm talking about an action adventure movie, and I'm dealing with something that's very standard American, a flying glass, no-brainer. If I frame that from the position of someone who watched a lot of these movies in Japan growing up, if I frame it from the position of how these movies fit in with Asian culture a lot more than our dramas do, now I've presented my project in a way that's very difficult for them to assail because I'm coming at it with real life experience. This is why there's this big quest to do more diversified cinema and to bring in people who are from diversified backgrounds. However, remember, when you are going into a meeting and you're meeting with people who are not from your same background, you have to give them an in to you. You can't come at it from an aggressive standpoint. And this is one of the challenges that I've seen when I'm dealing with some of my students who, like me, are non-Caucasian, is that they're wanting to present their story not in a humanist way, but in a way that's very specific to them and their culture. And I know this sounds like that's exactly the opposite of what I just said, but no, it's not. What you do is you say, okay, well, when you were growing up, and you look at the person on the other side of the desk and they're overweight, and you go, okay, you obviously had problems in PE class. So what you do is you frame it from the perspective of someone who felt like an outsider because everyone in the room had a competency that they didn't have. And the reason that I can explain that is not only was I this huge klutz who couldn't fit in, but I was being a huge klutz at an international school in a foreign country where my last name is Watanabe and I couldn't speak Japanese. So I felt like an outsider. So that's my piece where I am capitalizing on what I am. How can anyone deny that particular experience, right? So therefore, when I'm talking about this character and I can put that frame around it, now all of a sudden I'm unique in presenting it in the same way that if I'm doing a Hollywood story of some sort, I can frame it on the fact that I'm a total geek, and that what I used to do is I could position a movie not only in terms of its historic value, but also with its scandal value that was around the time of its production, and why certain people were cast and all of that. It makes good cocktail party chatter, and it makes a development pitch meeting go from being 15 minutes to 3 hours. So you get people to really appreciate what your extra is, because even if the project that you brought in is not right for them at this particular moment, you might be. And if the goal of a career in show business is to have a long-term career, if someone offers you a job and that job at all fits in with your competencies, you say yes, because now you're inside. And once you're inside, you get access to all that secret information that you, as someone who's pitching, really don't know. And from that perspective, from the inside and understanding what's going on in the industry at large, from that company's perspective, you now can pitch anybody on the planet. And yeah, isn't that part of the fun? Having a career in show business is you never know what part of your past can be the key to your big opportunity in the future.